Prince Andrew would fly off the handle if we've not opened the gate for him in time, or if we've stopped one of his guests because we've not got the right ID or we haven't been given any information of who they are. It would be verbally abusive. Shout, swear, yeah, just a really rude individual.
Picture this scene clearly, because it sets the tone for everything that follows. A grown man in his 40s shouting at housekeepers inside a royal residence. Not because something priceless was broken, not because staff arrived late, but because a stuffed animal had been placed in the wrong spot. That tiny mistake triggered a full meltdown. That is the image you need locked in your mind for the rest of this video. Because when you look back at everything that happened later, the infamous Newsnight interview, the scandals, the legal settlement, the public fallout, it all starts to make a lot more sense.
But before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button. The tea is just starting to heat up.
This wasn't just about one bad day or one awkward moment. It points to a much bigger pattern. A man who seemed to believe the world existed to serve him, and a royal household where staff were quietly trained to never challenge him, never push back, never question the outburst no matter how unreasonable it looked. That environment created a dangerous kind of silence.
A young lady turned up, probably about 22, 23 years old, said she was here to see Prince Andrew. He just came in about half hour previous, so we knew he was in, but the footman wasn't answering his phone. There was no way of us contacting anyone up there, so we just politely said to the lady, "We're really sorry, we can't let you in at the moment because we can't confirm you're expected." So she said, "Oh, shall I ring him on my mobile?" So we said, "Yeah, fine." So she rang Prince Andrew on her mobile, and we could hear him clearly. He said, put an officer on the phone. So my colleague took the phone and he said, "Listen to me, you fat lardy ass. Let my guest in immediately, I'm going to come down there." Everyone heard it. The lady went red, apologised, and we just let her in. So after that, obviously, those sort of issues we had with him, we would just let women in. Didn't ask questions because we just did not want the grief.
Paul Page was an armed protection officer in the Royalty Protection Command from 1998 to 2004. 6 full years stationed inside Buckingham Palace. During that time, he guarded the Queen, he guarded Prince Philip, and he also guarded Prince Andrew. That job meant seeing the royal family up close, not during public appearances or polished ceremonies, but during normal daily life behind palace walls. And before anyone immediately dismisses this as the words of a bitter former employee, pause for a moment, because the detail that makes Paul Page hard to ignore isn't simply his opinion or his frustration. It's the level of detail he brings, the very specific descriptions, the routines, the patterns, the small moments that only someone standing there in the room could describe.
On this particular occasion, we went into Prince Andrew's bedroom and his apartments, and on his bed was 72 teddy bears on his bed.
He described something that sounded almost unbelievable at first, yet strangely precise. Inside Prince Andrew's bedroom, there were roughly 50 to 60 soft toys arranged carefully across the bed. Not tossed there casually, not placed randomly like most people would expect, but positioned according to a very specific laminated diagram. Yes, an actual printed chart. A laminated sheet showing exactly where each teddy bear was supposed to sit. Every single one had its designated place. The angle, the position, the order, all mapped out like a strange little blueprint. Staff weren't guessing where things belonged. They had instructions staring right at them. If the housekeepers moved one while cleaning and didn't return it to the exact spot shown on the chart, Andrew reportedly didn't just complain quietly. According to the account, he would scream. Not raise his voice a little, not grumble under his breath, but actually shout in anger over a misplaced stuffed toy. That kind of reaction turned an ordinary cleaning task into something staff had to approach with extreme caution. One small mistake could trigger a full outburst. And here's the thing that makes the story stick in people's minds. Nobody invents something as oddly specific as a laminated teddy bear diagram. That's not the kind of detail someone casually makes up just to settle a grudge. It's the kind of strange, unforgettable detail that usually only exists if someone actually stood there and saw it with their own eyes.
She says she met you in 2001. She dined with you. She danced with you. You bought her drinks. You were in Tramp nightclub in London. And she went on to have sex with you in a house in Belgravia belonging to Ghislaine Maxwell.
Didn't happen. I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady. None whatsoever.
You don't remember meeting her?
No.
In November 2019, Andrew sat down across from Emily Maitlis on BBC Newsnight and delivered one of the most talked-about interviews in modern broadcast history. During that conversation, he made a claim that quickly became infamous. He said he could not sweat because of a medical condition, something he linked to an adrenaline overdose during the Falklands War. He presented that explanation as part of his response to allegations involving a night at a nightclub with a young woman who later made far more serious accusations. According to his argument, if he physically could not sweat, then he could not have been the man described in that account.
She was very specific about that night. She described dancing with you and you profusely sweating.
There's a slight problem with the sweating because I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time, because I had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at. It was almost impossible for me to sweat.
Paul Page watched that interview like millions of other viewers, but his reaction was immediate and very different. He said that during his years working inside the palace, he personally saw Andrew sweat. Not once, but multiple times during normal daily activity. According to him, other staff members who heard the claim were just as surprised. In his own words, the statement wasn't just questionable, he called it absurd.
This is the part that should really make people pause and think.
Not the sweating itself. At this point, that detail has almost turned into a strange punchline repeated across headlines and late-night jokes. The real issue isn't the sweating claim, it's the timeline around it. Andrew made that statement on national television in 2019, confidently presenting it as part of his explanation. But Paul Page had already been talking about Andrew's behavior long before that interview ever aired. The gap between those two moments raises a bigger question about who knew what and when. Because if people inside the palace had already heard these accounts for years, then the claim made on television suddenly looks a lot more complicated. Staff inside the palace reportedly understood right away that the explanation didn't match what many of them had personally seen. Yet despite that, nobody stepped forward publicly at the time. Not the BBC during the interview itself, not the palace press office afterward. Not a single major institution brought Paul Page in front of a camera to say what some former colleagues already believed privately. Instead, it took years. It took ITV. It took 60 Minutes Australia sending a full television crew all the way to London. It took independent outlets willing to speak with a man the establishment had already pushed to the side, because in their eyes, Page came with baggage.
I got myself into a lot of trouble when I was a Royal Protection Officer. I basically was dealing in shares. I became a millionaire while I was a Royal Protection Officer in my own right before I got in trouble. And I basically started investing police officers' money as well. And it came to a point where I was just hemorrhaging money. It started off well, we were making money, and I was dealing with millions of pounds, and the stress got to me, and I started losing money. So I turned to fraud. I went to court, I was held to account for my actions, and I spent 6 years in prison.
Back in 2009, Paul Page was convicted in connection with a £3 million property fraud case, and he served time. That fact has been repeated often by tabloids and critics to challenge his credibility. The conviction became a convenient headline that followed his name everywhere. But there's one thing the palace has never done publicly. They have never directly denied the story about the teddy bears.
They have never denied the shouting at staff, and they have never officially challenged the sweating claim on the record. Instead, the focus often shifts back to the man telling the story rather than the details of the story itself.
I do think there's a huge scandal here. It's only going to get bigger. It's not just about financial and sexual misdemeanors. It's, I think, a national security scandal, and we're getting hints of that already.
The book dives deep into the lives of Andrew and Fergie, exploring their finances, their public controversies, their private struggles, and the complicated web of relationships surrounding them. It examines how their story unfolded over decades, tracing everything from royal privilege to the mounting scandals that slowly reshaped their public image. The research also addressed one of the most sensitive topics connected to the story, the relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Lowney's book didn't just touch on it briefly. According to reviewers, it placed those connections within a broader historical context, supported by extensive documentation and interviews. The book quickly became a bestseller in the United Kingdom. Critics described it as rigorous research built on hundreds of interviews, along with freedom of information requests that uncovered records many people had never seen before. And when the time came to prepare an American edition, something unexpected happened. Lowney sold the U.S. rights to Simon & Schuster's Gallery imprint for a reported $250,000 advance. Early editorial feedback from the publisher suggested the material was strong. According to Lowney, editors initially told him the core content was all there and simply needed shaping for the American market. But only a few weeks later, the situation changed suddenly. The publisher abruptly terminated the contract, labeling the manuscript unacceptable. Lowney says he was not given the full 90-day revision period that his contract guaranteed. Now he is suing for several $100,000 in damages, arguing that the decision destroyed his opportunity to properly enter the American publishing market. Look at the sequence for a moment, because it raises serious questions. A book sells extremely well in the United Kingdom. One of the biggest publishers in the United States buys the rights. Editors initially say the research and material are solid. Then, just weeks before publication, everything stops and the project disappears. Lowney himself says that while working on the book, he repeatedly encountered barriers when trying to access certain archival records related to Andrew and Fergie. According to him, requests were sometimes blocked, with explanations citing security concerns or claiming the documents simply were not available. He says the York family instructed friends not to speak with him during his research. According to his account, people who might have provided insight suddenly stopped returning calls or declined interviews. He also claims that a major American news outlet, ABC News, was allegedly warned it could lose royal access if it pursued a critical story about Andrew. Soon after that warning, the story was reportedly dropped. Now, is there a signed letter from the palace ordering anyone to stop a book or silence a journalist? No, there isn't. But when you look at the sequence of events, it raises eyebrows. When archives block your access to documents, when potential sources suddenly refuse to talk, when a broadcaster backs away from a story, and when a publisher walks away from a project just weeks before printing, the situation begins to look unusual. At some point, the question stops being, is there a pattern, and starts becoming, who benefits from that pattern? That shift in perspective is where things start getting uncomfortable for powerful institutions.
I think the worry is that there are more damaging revelations to come, which there are. I have a lot of material which I'm putting into an updated paperback in the summer. I know that there are much more to come out from the Epstein revelations. We're beginning to see them today. And I think we will now get more victims coming forward, and I think more people coming forward with stories. And I think this thing will begin to unfurl. It's going to be really bad.
Tom Bauer is not someone who has built a career by staying quiet or avoiding controversial subjects. In fact, his entire reputation is built on the opposite approach.
He has written books that have upset celebrities, politicians, and even members of the royal family. The Beckhams, Meghan, Charles, and others have all appeared in his investigative work. If a public figure has faced a major controversy, there's a good chance Bauer has examined it in detail somewhere in his writing. When it comes to Andrew, Bauer has been unusually blunt. He's described Andrew as a professional con man, a phrase that instantly grabbed headlines when it appeared in interviews and commentary discussions. That alone was enough to spark debate across British media. He also described the Newsnight interview as a masterclass in deceit, arguing that the performance raised more questions than it answered. And he has warned publicly that ongoing developments, including the Epstein-related files and new memoirs, such as Virginia Jeffries, could potentially trigger what he called a serious constitutional crisis for the monarchy.
That when he decided to do the interview with Newsnight, he clearly rehearsed how he was going to explain the photograph in the park and everything, and went into that interview with clear determination to lie, not only clearly about his relationship with Epstein, but also his relationship with Virginia Giuffre and the rest of the things. And what is remarkable is looking at his face as he lies. It is the face of a professional con man, a professional liar.
But interestingly, the detail that spread the fastest online wasn't one of those dramatic warnings. It was a single sentence Bauer said during interviews and panel discussions. He stated, and this is the direct quote, "This is the chapter the palace hoped I would never write." That one line lit up social media. Commentary channels on YouTube repeated it again and again, speculating about what kind of material he might have uncovered. Some suggested there could be a fully written chapter that publishers were nervous to include. Others wondered whether parts of the manuscript had been softened or removed during editing. Whether that chapter was ever formally deleted, toned down, or still exists quietly inside Bauer's research notes is something only a few people truly know. But the impact of that statement was immediate. It suggested there may be parts of Andrew's story that powerful circles would rather keep out of the spotlight. And that is where the connection appears between Page, Lowney, and Bauer. Three completely different individuals, a former protection officer, a Cambridge historian, an investigative biographer. None of them work together, none share the same publisher or background, yet their accounts all point toward the same idea. Whenever someone gets close to uncomfortable details about Andrew, something seems to push back. A career suffers, a book disappears, access to archives becomes restricted, a broadcaster steps away from a story. You can dismiss one voice easily, dismissing three becomes much harder, and ignoring a pattern like that takes real effort. Paul Burrell served as Princess Diana's butler. That role placed him deep inside the royal household, not as a distant observer, but as someone who lived and worked within the palace system every day. He saw firsthand how decisions were made behind closed doors, how sensitive situations were handled, and how the institution reacted whenever a scandal threatened its reputation. According to Burrell, the royal household has always had a powerful instinct to close ranks when pressure appears. Over the years, he has spoken publicly about what he describes as a culture where protecting the institution itself often takes priority above everything else, including the individuals inside it. In his view, the survival of the monarchy as a symbol was always treated as the top priority. Burrell has also shared stories about Diana's own fears and mistrust towards certain senior figures within the household. She reportedly worried about how information moved through the system and who ultimately controlled the narrative. Now, to be clear, Burrell was not Andrew's butler, and he was not a direct witness to events inside Royal Lodge. But the reason his perspective matters here is not because of specific claims about Andrew. It is because of what he says about how the system itself operates. That same system is the one Paul Page says protected Andrew from internal staff complaints. It is the system Andrew Lowney says blocked parts of his historical research. It is the same system that, according to reports, allegedly warned ABC News to back away from certain coverage. When you place those accounts side by side, they begin to describe a structure designed to control problems before they grow too large. Diana reportedly spoke to Burrell about the pressures inside the royal family and the way the institution managed controversy. Years before Andrew's legal troubles ever became public conversation, Burrell had already been warning that the royal family sometimes handled problems quietly behind the scenes. In his words, issues could be swept under the carpet until the moment the carpet simply could not hold them anymore. He never predicted a specific arrest or legal case involving Andrew, but he described a system where unresolved problems could quietly build for years. In that sense, the situation that eventually unfolded did not appear from nowhere. It developed inside an environment that had long tried to manage difficulties out of public view. Queen Elizabeth II stood by Andrew publicly for many years, almost until the end of her life. Even after the disastrous Newsnight interview, after the allegations became global headlines, and after the civil settlement, her approach remained cautious. Andrew lost his official royal duties, yes, but he continued living at Royal Lodge and remained connected to the family circle. For decades, many biographers described Andrew as one of the Queen's personal favorites. Journalists have also written that the monarchy's internal structure helped shield him from certain pressures. Access to records was sometimes limited, requests for archival documents were blocked or delayed, and some broadcasters were reportedly cautious when approaching critical stories involving senior royals.
The Queen did not create every part of that system, but critics argue that it continued to operate around her son for longer than it might under different circumstances. Then, when she passed away, the structure that had protected Andrew for so long began to change. King Charles publicly stated that the legal process must be allowed to run its course. Prince William, according to several reports, pushed more firmly behind the scenes for Andrew to be permanently sidelined from royal life. The atmosphere inside the institution had clearly shifted. As legal pressure increased, investigators began executing search warrants and seizing electronic devices from properties connected to the case. For the first time in decades, the combined force of lawsuits, law enforcement investigations, and media scrutiny moved forward without a reigning monarch positioned to intervene or slow the process. Now, did Queen Elizabeth II possess some single explosive secret about Andrew locked away in a vault somewhere inside the palace? Probably not. Real life rarely works like that. What she did have, however, was something far more powerful. Decades of knowledge. Decades of watching her son's behavior behind closed doors, away from the cameras and ceremonies. She knew his temperament, the flashes of anger, the entitlement that sometimes surfaced, and the relationships that occasionally raised uncomfortable questions. And again, the choice that followed was protection rather than exposure. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly over the course of many years. That wasn't one hidden secret buried with her. It was a decision made quietly, day after day, throughout her lifetime. Staff members inside the royal household saw the differences in how situations were handled. Authors researching royal history noticed patterns in how information moved or stopped. Former employees and insiders observed the same thing from their own vantage points. The staff knew, the writers knew, the butlers knew the difference between what was shown publicly and what was handled privately.
And now the wider public has started to piece together those same observations. February 2026. Andrew is arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Investigators move quickly, seizing hard drives, laptops, mobile phones, and documents from Royal Lodge and Wood Farm. The National Crime Agency becomes involved, and legal commentators begin calling the situation the most serious crisis for the monarchy since the 1936 abdication. And somewhere in that moment, scattered across years of interviews, books, and television appearances, the same thought likely crosses several minds. Paul Page, Andrew Loney, Tom Bower, Paul Burrell. Each of them, in very different ways, tried years earlier to place pieces of Andrew's story onto the public record. Page was dismissed by many as unreliable. Loney saw his American publishing deal collapse. Bower was criticized as sensational. Burrell was often written off as gossip. None of them are celebrating now, but none of them appear shocked either, because the picture they described years ago centered on a man who seemed to believe the rules did not apply to him, operating inside an institution that often moved to shield its own members from fallout. Now that same story has entered the realm of formal investigation. What investigators ultimately find inside those seized devices remains unknown for now. But one thing already stands out clearly. For roughly 2 decades, people close to Andrew's world tried to speak out in different ways. And for years, the system surrounding him ensured those voices struggled to gain traction. They were called unreliable. They were dismissed. But as events unfold, some observers now say those voices may simply have been early. If this is the kind of content that helps you follow complicated stories like this one, consider subscribing, because this situation is still developing and the full picture may take time to emerge.